Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, gamer! Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 113 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. I'm doing another feedback episode and another World Builder episode today and another unplugged episode. No, I'm not doing 3 episodes. Those are all in one. Another combination hybrid transformer episode today. I want to thank everybody for the fantastic feedback I've gotten. It just keeps rolling in, and I really appreciate it. And I tell you what, for those of you that love the world building episodes, and I know there's a lot of you out there, one great way to keep me doing world building episodes is keep sending in all this feedback, because we've done a lot of world building episodes here in season 6. And a big part of that is just, I get so much feedback and I get so much just awesome feedback that I want to talk about it on the show. So unless I'm going to be doing 4-hour episodes, we just end up with a lot of world building episodes, which is fine by me. I love doing them. They're my favorite episodes to do. So I've gotten a lot more feedback, and so we're going to talk about that today, and this will be our 15th world building episode. So if you're new to the show or you're new to the world building episodes, you can head to the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com, and I will have all of the previous episodes listed and linked there so that you can find the other world building episodes really easily. If you are new to the world building episode, though, you don't necessarily need to start with the first one. You could start with world building episode number 6, which is called Welcome to Primordia, or world building episode number 5, which is called Back to the Drawing Board. And the reason is I started out with a very kind of different ideas about what I was going to do with my world. And so the first kind of 4 or 5 world building episodes were off on kind of a different tangent. And then when I came up with Primordia, I kind of threw some of the earlier ideas out the window. So if you're, a completionist and you want to hear everything, then you can go all the way back to the first world building episode. But if you're just wanting to get caught up on the Primordia stuff, you could start with world building number 6, Welcome to Primordia. And again, I'll have all those linked in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com so you can go find the one that you want. Now, before we get into the world building stuff, I do have a piece of feedback that isn't necessarily relevant to world building from Ethan Malone, who wrote in on Google Plus regarding the cleric episodes I've done. And Ethan says, I'm surprised I haven't heard anyone talk about Socrates as a model of a cleric character. He's described as not only divinely inspired in the form of a voice that speaks only to him to tell him no when he's on the wrong path, but he's also said to be a capable warrior that fought in the Peloponnesian War. A wandering philosopher feels like a far more compelling way to pull off a cleric character class than a cloistered priest. That connection didn't occur to me until this episode. Great content as always. So thank you very much, Ethan, for that. And I completely agree. I didn't think of Socrates either, but I completely agree with you. I think a wandering philosopher would be an awesome starting point for a cool cleric character. And yeah, and definitely would fit better with the kind of polytheistic type religions that we normally have in D&D worlds. So I think that's awesome. I think that's a great idea. All right, real quickly, I want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to my Tier 6 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. Let's hear it for Steve. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you to Steve, and thank you to all the patrons for supporting the show. I really appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. And if you're interested in supporting the show, one of the great ways that you can do so is becoming a patron. Just head on over to starwalkerstudios.com, go into the show notes for any of the Game Master's Journey episodes, and you will find a button for Patreon at the top of the show notes. Will take you to my Patreon page. You can find out more about that. I do neat little perks for the patrons, including a monthly podcast that I do just for the patrons. And I also upload game material that I come up with for the patrons. So recently I've been uploading stuff for 5th edition D&D and for Primordia. And right now I'm in the process of uploading Dragons of Primordia. And I talked about this in the last episode of Game Master's Journey, but I'm doing spell lists and some thoughts on each of the dragons for Primordia. So far I've done the Red Dragon and more to come. Another great way to support the show is to check out battlebards.com. And BattleBards is a place where you can get premium quality audio to use in your tabletop RPGs. You can get music that you can use, ambient sound effects, all kinds of stuff. So if you check out battlebards.com and you like what you see, when you make your first order, you can use one of my coupon codes, GMJ1, 2, or 3, to get some free bonus tracks with that first order. So you can check out the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com, and I have at the bottom of the show notes in the support the podcast section, I have the various coupon codes explained because they're used for different packages. Sorry, it's kind of complicated. We're working on a simpler solution, but for right now, that's what we got. So if you're interested in checking out battlebards.com and you want to buy something from them, definitely check out the show notes and grab one of those coupon codes. Not only will you get some nice bonus tracks, but then Star Walker Studios gets a little kickback too. And there are other great ways to support the show, and I explain them all in the show notes at the bottom. A lot of them won't cost you any money. So check it out, and thank you to everyone who helps out. I really appreciate it. All right, so for our main topic today, we're talking world building, and I'm going to go through some feedback I've gotten on the world building and just share the feedback with you and some thoughts on my own, and we'll see how much of this we can get through today. So first off, I heard from Boz Bunnick on the website, and I think I'm at least pronouncing his name close to correctly because he hasn't corrected me yet. So hopefully I'm close at least. He says, I listened to the podcast yesterday. Another nice one, Lex. Thank you. While listening, I thought about the social political state in Elandria when it's still the first or second generation after the big events you mentioned, and how to incorporate a church of the nine, a single church that has real gods listening in, that would certainly be a fourth power factor. And I completely agree with you, and I'm kind of surprised that I missed that myself. So I was talking about kind of this idea of the government of Elandria having a system of checks and balances, and you have the queen and the royal family, which is one part of the government. You've got the nobles, which is another part, the merchants, which is another. And then Boz is suggesting here that the church would be a fourth part of the government. And I think that makes perfect sense. And the only problem with that is it's an even number, so I could see you having a tie. So I'm not sure how that would work. Maybe the queen gets the final vote if there's a tie or something like that. So yeah, that's definitely a great point. Boz goes on to say, one thought on celibacy that you did not mention, but was key to why it came about in the Catholic Church, is the one about patriarchy and hereditary nobility. A large factor for both the Pope and the kings was that they did not want to give the already powerful church patriarchs also the ability to amass land through marriage and lineage. So yeah, that's another excellent point. So that that could maybe be a reason to argue for some celibacy in my priesthoods in Primordia and Elandria. But I don't know. I'm probably not going to go there because I don't know. I like getting rid of the idea of celibate clergy and whatnot. One of the themes of this season has been making the cleric more attractive to play. And, you want your character to be able to get it on, right? Or at least have that possibility open. So I don't think a lot of players would be super enthusiastic about playing a celibate character, or at the very least having that forced on them. If you make a character and you decide my character has taken a vow of celibacy for whatever reason, that's all well and good. But to say, oh, if you play a cleric, you have to be celibate, I don't think a lot of people would go for that. I know I wouldn't. All right, back to Boz's message. He says, so what do we have? We have nobility and royalty. I think it's nice to give them a house of lords and ladies, sort of still representing the old status quo. Yeah, totally. Then I would think these nobles have a role in farming, letting the people farm on the remaining land under the mythal. And they could be the police force, knights, and responsible for keeping the walls and shields and the magical physical walls in order. I would also have them still having the right to the lands outside, so they would have to be involved in any reclaiming of it for a power balance. And yeah, that's a really good point, and something to think about is, what is the deal with these estates outside the city? I mean, surely in writing, they still own them, but there's also, I think, this idea of, if you own some land, but you don't have a presence on that land, after a certain amount of time, is it really yours anymore? And if I'm doing a time period, within a generation of the retreat, then yeah, those lands would definitely still be claimed by the nobles and they would be able to exercise their rights to that land. But if we're going to advance a few hundred years, that may not be the case anymore. Or at the very least, someone who, let's say, a certain noble had an estate out beyond the city and had a keep and whatnot. If someone was able to clear that keep of monsters and claim it and hold it, I think they would at least have an argument to make that, hey, I should get to keep this land because I'm the one that cleared it and I'm holding it. Kind of the whole idea of possession is 9/10 of the law. So, that would probably be something that would go into the courts or be decided by these different branches of the government. And then that would set a precedent for how that would be how that would be handled in the future. But that's definitely something to think about. Like, what would happen with that? Because that's a really good point. And I hadn't actually thought about that. But one of my ideas for an adventure in Primordia and in Elandria is where the player characters are sent by the guild to recover one of these castles that are sort of near Elandria, not super far away, but are not within the mythal. And so it's been lost, and, maybe there's monsters living there now or something. And the idea is the PCs go and hopefully succeed in clearing the monsters out of this place. And then this can become a stronghold for the player characters to use from then on. But, when I came up with that idea, I completely overlooked the fact that, well, somebody probably still owns that land, at least on paper. And what is that, how is that noble going to react to people squatting in his castle? Probably not well, right? And he or she is going to try to say, these are my lands and I own them, and thank you very much for getting all the vermin out, but it's still mine. Now, the guild does have a lot of money, and player characters tend to have a lot of money, so maybe it could be a simple thing of just buying the noble out and saying, well, how much do you want to sell the rights to us? But that's definitely something to think about and something to explore in the future. All right, so Boz goes on to say, then we have the merchants. They would be the ones who provide the money to operate everything. Yeah, they're going to have the most amount of liquid cash of any of the groups. Although, the church might have quite a bit of money, but probably not as much as the merchants. I do think that over time they will merge, and I think he's talking about the nobles and the merchants here, But give it another generation or two for that to happen. And yeah, I totally agree. And I think even if they do merge, that like Boz is saying here, that's going to take time. And one of the reasons that I was thinking about moving the campaign setting to right after the retreat, like say within a decade of the retreat, is that would not have happened yet. And I think it would be fun, especially for people that are into political games, to role play during a time where you still have a merchant and a noble class, but there's all this conflict going on between them because of everything we've talked about in previous episodes. So I think that would be really fun to play with. But I definitely agree that, within 10 years, those classes wouldn't have merged. That's probably something that's going to take, at least a couple generations to happen. So Boz says, compare 17th century Holland, where merchants sort of rose to the occasion to replace the social layer of the nobility in the cities. I'm pretty sure Venetia and Genoa in Italy saw a similar development, but earlier, where the classes merged. So I'll have to take your word on that. I don't know anything about 17th century Holland or any of that stuff. And I'm really glad I have heard from some people that know a bit of history that kind of responded to my request for people to enlighten me about whether or not, this has ever happened historically where you have nobles and merchants starting out as separate classes and then merging over time. So it looks like that there is historical precedence for this. So that's something I definitely want to look more into. Boz says, and of course, in early industrial society, rich merchants and manufacturers were actively working towards gaining titles for their social standing and a closer ear of the monarch and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. And, that's something else I want to play with. And that idea has been presented by other listeners as well. This idea of the merchants wanting the legitimacy that the nobility has. It's like, yeah, they've got a lot of money, but they may not have titles. They may not have lands. They may not have vassals. They may not have any kind of connection to the royal family by blood or whatnot, like the nobles will tend to have. So that's something that the merchants are going to want. And I think that's kind of going to be the vehicle for the merging of the classes, is you're going to see a lot of merchants marrying into noble families. And it's kind of a win-win for both sides, right? The merchant gets some legitimacy because now I'm married into this noble family and now I have blood ties to the queen and the royal family. And the nobility gets an infusion of cash from this merchant or merchant family or guild or whatever that has a lot of money. So I see them both benefiting from that. And I think that's what's going to happen, is you're going to see more and more of these marriages happen. And over, a span of, 60 years or something, you're going to see a merging, because eventually all of the merchants are going to be married into noble families. And you'll probably get to a point where there won't be a noble family that hasn't married into a merchant family and vice versa. And at that point, they've kind of become one class, I think. All right, so Boz says, then we have the Guild of Adventurers. It probably started as mainly interested in knowledge of artifacts, a bit of a sage's college, but rose to the occasion when needed. And yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking is, before the retreat, the Guild of Adventurers was a guild of explorers, and they were basically all about exploring the world, finding remnants of ancient civilizations, and specifically looking for lost knowledge, looking for lost magical, quote, technology and things like that. And as part of that, they either discovered how to make the portals, or they figured out how to make the portals by taking, maybe ideas from different cultures and different time periods and kind of putting them together and figuring out, oh, we can make these portals. And that, that kind of started them getting into more kind of involved with trade and whatnot, because they could build these portals. And then the retreat happens, and now suddenly they've massively grown in power almost overnight, because now these portals are the only way that anybody can trade. I think that the guild would still struggle to define their own role in society. They might not be interested in wielding power apart from a few factions, plot point maybe. And yeah, totally. I've already got ideas about having different factions within the Adventurers Guild and having some of those be very corrupt, and even having this conflict within the leadership of the guild between people who are kind of more, if not altruistic, at least like they don't want to rule the world. They just want their peace. And people who are more like, we can rule the world and we should rule the world. And having a conflict between those different viewpoints, I think would be a lot of fun. Boz suggests I would make it so that the guild is not allowed to hold lands. They are not nobility after all. That could change in a century or with further events. If they were able to gain land, they would soon be overpowering and too independent. Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of members of the guild would be nobles, though. I think, in an adventurer's career, as you gain power, both, kind of magical or personal power, and also just riches and whatnot, I think a lot of adventurers would end up being nobles of some kind. They would be granted lands or a title or whatnot just because they were so rich or so powerful, or maybe they become, maybe they get adopted by a merchant family or something like that. So I think a lot of people in the guild would have titles and maybe even lands, although, they may not have access to them because they're outside the city. But, Boz does bring up a good point about, you don't want the guild to be too powerful. And one way to limit that power would be to not allow them to have lands. So, yeah, I don't know. And the thing also to keep in mind is that the guild is not limited to Elandria. The guild is an organization that spans, if not the entire world, at least the quote known world. So there are chapters of the guild in all of the cities. So, there's, how does the guild work overall? And then how does the guild work specifically in Elandria? So maybe in Elandria, they can't have land, but other places they can. Now, I've already just, kind of in my own mind established that they do have a guild hall in Elandria, but maybe that's all they can get. Maybe they can't get other land. I don't know. It's definitely an idea. So Boz says, and then we have the Church of the Nine. This powerful institution would have to have a function in the state. And why not make them both visionaries, the cultural framework, and the judiciary part of the state? After all, the divine powers should make them the right ones to decide a case on its merits. And it would be a nice check and balance position versus all the other factions. And yeah, that's a great idea. And I think that makes perfect sense, having the church be the court, because they have magics like Zone of Truth, where they cast a spell and you can't lie, and divination and things like that. So it makes perfect sense that they would take on that role in the government, in the society. And I totally agree that the church, especially if there's this one Church of the Nine, that it would have a lot of power. Now, personally, I was kind of initially more thinking of the Church of the Nine as just a building that kind of collects all the different gods together. I wasn't necessarily thinking of it as a unified political body, but that might be an interesting way to go with that. And it will really depend on how I develop the religions and the mystery cults and whatnot right now. And, one way I could do it is have a religion of the Church of the Nine, where that's kind of just the generic religion that your average person subscribes to, where it follows all of the gods. And I'm kind of thinking of the seven in Game of Thrones, how you have, one religion, one church, but they follow these seven different gods and they have different teachings associated with each of the gods. So I could see something like that. And that would be kind of what your average everyday person would think of religion. If they want to go be religious, they would go to the Church of the Nine and make an offering to either a particular god or maybe to all the gods overall. And then those who are really religiously devout will tend to be part of a mystery cult. And the mystery cults are organizations that are devoted to a specific deity and oftentimes a specific aspect of a specific deity. So you might have a mystery cult that follows a certain aspect of the goddess Primordia. And, that's kind of where the power would lie. So someone like a cleric or a paladin would be associated with one of these mystery cults because they're the ones that are actually trying to interact with the gods on a direct one-to-one basis. So that's kind of how I'm thinking of it now. But it's kind of still all in flux as far as all of that goes. Boz says, as far as scarcity of food, I think that you'd have magically boosted crop growing and farming. And he liked my solution with the water, which is basically that there is a rift to the plane of water that is always open, and that feeds an aqueduct system that provides water to the city. But he makes an interesting point, which I honestly didn't even think about this until Boz brought this up. But he's like, well, now you've got kind of a chink in the armor of Elandria because now we have a way into the city that bypasses the mythal and the portals because we have this rift to the water plane. So, maybe you could get into the city by going to the water plane and finding the rift to Elandria, and there you go. So I'm sure that there are some kind of defenses or safeguards in place to prevent that from happening, but maybe they're not foolproof. So that could be something really interesting to explore. So yeah, he makes a good point about using magic to enhance crops and growing food and whatnot. And obviously that would be something that would be done. One thought I had thinking about this, because a couple people brought up, the idea of water and food being scarce and whatnot. And the water was an easy one to solve with this, opening to the plane of water, and you've got infinite water. But I kind of made the joke last week that, well, there's not a plane of food, so you still have to worry about food. And one of the ideas I had was, as part of expanding the city to relieve population pressure, is they could have more fields then as well. But, one thought that I had, reading this feedback and thinking about it is, my idea of the mythal is it's a sphere. Okay, so it extends as far above the ground of the city as it does out beyond the city. So let's say the mythal is, I don't know, I'll just grab a number, 15 miles in diameter. I have no idea if that's big enough or too big or whatever, but let's just say it's 15 miles in diameter. It's a sphere, right? So that means it goes, if you're standing at the exact center, it goes 7.5 miles out in all directions, including up and down. So one idea I had was that there could either be a cave complex beneath the city, or they could create one that is still within the mythal, and they could enchant these caves with like permanent daylight spells and whatnot. And you could have caves under the city with fields in them, and they're growing crops underground using artificial daylight. And I thought that could be kind of cool. And that could be a way to help explain how they're feeding everyone. So yeah, that could work. Boz says, another thought about opening the roads with development, I think that would potentially bring about a rift between factions in the guild, because by then they would have become somewhat used to the position of privilege that the portals give them, and the roads would immediately change some of that. Other factions might be in favor, though, because it would allow expansion into new reclaimed domains. And yeah, that's a great point. And one thing I want to play with if I ever get into more political things is I do want to have different factions within the guild that either want different things or have very different methods of achieving whatever their goals are. Because, one idea I have is the guild isn't necessarily, quote, good. Not everybody in the guild is of a good alignment. You might have evil people in the guild or whatnot, especially lawful evil. I could see those people getting by in the guild and, not getting kicked out or whatever. So yeah, some of those factions could be, people that want to use the roads and expand that way. And they're like, well, hey, it takes magic to protect the roads, so we'll still be involved with that and blah, 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 blah. And like Boz is saying, then we can expand. But there might be other people in the guild that are like, hey, we've got it really good right now. We've got these portals, nobody else has any control over the portals. We've kind of got everything in our hands right now. And with the roads, that could be a real chance of losing some of that control. So that's a great idea. So thank you so much for the feedback, Boz. I really appreciate it, and lots of great thoughts. Brett McLean wrote in on the Google Plus community, and he says, one of the advantages to Primordia and its system of portal travel is that when you are ready to move on to the next city for designing, it doesn't necessarily have to be the next closest city. Presumably, it would be the next one your players are traveling to, which could literally be anything on the planet or anywhere on the planet. It really gives you the opportunity to develop radically different cultures and environments for the PCs to explore without having to make them slog their way across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Very cool. And yeah, Brett, you're absolutely right. Honestly, I didn't even think about that until you wrote that in. And yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, that's a really great point. When I'm ready to build another city, I can put it anywhere in the world I want because there's going to be a portal connecting it. So it could be on the other side of the planet if I wanted it to, which is really cool. And like Brett says, I don't have to worry about, well, how are the player characters ever going to get there if it's 3,000 miles away? It doesn't matter. So that is pretty awesome. One of my favorite parts of this show is when I get feedback from you. I do these feedback episodes where it's pretty much, 99% of the content is coming from listeners like you. And even on the other episodes that aren't necessarily feedback episodes, I love to include listener feedback whenever I can. So I love hearing from my listeners. You guys have such great ideas and such insightful thoughts. So if you would like to give some feedback for the show and maybe hear your comment on a future episode, a great way to do so is to email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Other great ways to get a hold of me are on Twitter @LexStarWalker and on Google Plus LexStarWalker. You can also head to the website, StarWalkerStudios.com, and you can find other places on the internet to find me and keep up with what I'm doing. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, Reddit. I'm everywhere. And you can find links to all that stuff at StarWalkerStudios.com. All right, returning to the feedback, still got more feedback. Robert Poulin wrote in on Google Plus, and he says, great episode. Where does the Adventurers Guild's wealth come from if they aren't monetizing the portals? Their only income is adventuring loot? Question? That doesn't seem like a viable long-term business plan. Yeah, maybe not. If they're financed by adventurers, PC guild members should have fees or tithes to pay. Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something I haven't decided yet or not. I know in the guild artisan, I think it is, there's a background where you're a member of a guild in the player's handbook, and I think you have to pay something like 5 gold a month to the guild. Now, they provide a lot of stuff for you, and I have a feeling you get a lot more out of it than you pay in. Of course, that's going to depend on your dungeon master, I guess. But yeah, so it could be that there are dues that are owed to the guild. I haven't decided exactly how that is going to work. My initial thought was that the guild would just take a percentage of loot that you find in ruins and whatnot. But yeah, that's something I really need to figure out is how is that handled? Maybe just having you pay a flat fee every month. That might be the easiest way to deal with it. Robert says, I think the city government would be even more threatened by a large group of powerful individuals if they don't have a source of stable income. Elandria should also impose tariffs on trade through the portals. It would make a great way for the nobility to siphon some wealth from the merchants. So as far as to answer the question of where does the guild's money come from, it does primarily come from, what Robert's calling adventuring loot. They have teams of adventurers that they send out and explore ruins. they find artifacts, they find magic items, they find treasure in the form of works of art, gems and jewelry and actual coins and precious metals and stuff like that. And I think that they would find more than enough from that kind of stuff to pay the bills and have profit and all that good stuff. I mean, you think of, a player character in the amount of mass or the amount of wealth that they amass throughout their career, it seems like a organization made of player characters who says they get 10% of what you gain or whatever, they'd have more money than God, you'd think. But I need to figure out how exactly that's handled in World, because there are definitely some possible issues there. Because if it's a thing of the guild says, anytime you explore a ruin or whatnot, we get 10%, how are they going to police that? They're going to have a whole department of the guild that uses divination and whatnot to spy on guild members and make sure that they're not cheating them or not finding treasures that they don't report or whatnot. So it seems like logistically it would be easier just to say you owe us so much money every month as part of your membership or whatever. But yeah, that's something I definitely need to figure out. I also think that the guild has a huge amount of wealth that it's accumulated over the centuries. Some of that wealth came from powerful and rich individuals who were involved in the actual formation of the guild and kind of infused a lot of wealth into it in the very beginning. And I'm not going to tell you who or what those beings were, but some of them had a lot of wealth. And they basically donated a significant portion of it to the guild to kind of get it up and running. And it's always been a profitable venture, even before they had the portals, just through the fact that they're employing adventurers and adventurers tend to be the most wealthy people in the world. They have plenty of money, I think. It's just figuring out exactly, what the nuts and bolts of that are as far as how it would affect player characters and how I would balance that. Because, you might be thinking, wait a minute, you're going to make PCs pay money to be in the guild. Well, keep in mind that player characters will receive things from the guild like room and board, even magic items, consumables like potions and whatnot and stuff like that. Like right now, I have established in the adventures I've run in Primordia that when you are accepted as a full member of the guild, they give you a cloak, and it's a magical cloak of protection. So, and I'm thinking once I work out the actual ranks within the guild and the renown system and all that at different ranks you will get magic items. So at a certain rank, you might get a magical weapon. At another rank, you might get some kind of wondrous item or whatnot. You're also going to be able to buy magic items, and especially things like potions and scrolls you're going to be able to get from the guild. So there's going to be a lot the player characters are getting from the guild. So even if I told them you have to pay 50 gold a month to be in the guild, I think that they would see that as more than worth it. The guild also provides spellcasting services, including healing for people. And, another thing to keep in mind, and this is maybe a distinction I haven't defined on the show, and maybe I've confused people because I haven't defined it, but I make a distinction between a quote priest and a quote cleric. So at least in Primordia, priests or any kind of religious person, they don't have magic. They don't have spells. They can't do miracles and things like that. The only people that can do miracles are clerics and paladins, or if it's an NPC, it might be some kind of NPC class like the acolyte, I think, gets spells. But those are the only people who actually get spells as divine casters, and they tend to be associated with the guild, not so much with the Church of the Nine. And I even have this idea, and I think I'm going to talk about this in probably the next world building episode, that clerics and paladins, at least in some areas or in some churches, may actually be seen as heretics, or at the very least undesirables. Because keep in mind that the religion, like say the Church of the Nine, and the people involved with that, they're not clerics, they're not paladins, they don't have spells, and the gods really don't pay any attention to them. So it's kind of all make believe. Like their religion and their everything, their church, it's all created by people. The gods never came down and said, you can't eat pork on Thursday or anything like that. Like that was all created by people as part of their religion. And the gods don't care about any of that. So you imagine, an organization like that, this church, where they don't really have any real connection with the gods. They can't call in favors from the gods or anything like that. And then you have people like clerics who actually can work miracles and can make their God's power manifest. And the church would see those people as a threat and would tend to denounce them as heretics and would not like clerics and paladins because they could be a huge threat to them if they ever decided they wanted to lead. They could lead people away from the church because, well, I can raise people from the dead. Can you do that? No, you can't. So who really is a true follower of this God? The person that can raise people from the dead or the person that can't? So that's an idea I want to play with, and it's something I'll talk about more in a future episode. But because of that, unlike in maybe a lot of D&D worlds, or at least some D&D worlds, if you need healing magic, you don't go to the Church of the Nine, you go to the guild, because that's where the people that can work miracles are. So that's one way that the guild has income is, not from normal people, but from rich nobles and merchants. They might come to buy some healing potions, or they might come to have a scar removed or some kind of healing magic cast, that kind of stuff. The guild also has libraries and sages. So anyone, wanting obscure information or really any kind of information, something, that we today might go to Google or the internet or a library for, people go to the guild for that kind of stuff. And of course, they may charge for stuff like that. And they, like I said, they also sell potions and minor magic items and stuff like that. It could also be possible that maybe the city is paying the guild for use of the portals, or at least helping to cover the cost of maintaining them. Now, I've said in the past, there's not really any cost associated with maintaining a portal, but there's a huge amount of cost associated with creating new ones. So it could be that the city helps to fund that for the guild. So the idea might be that, individual citizens don't have to pay to use the portals, but the city itself is paying the guild for them or something. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. And Robert also brought in the idea of the city charging tariffs and taxes on goods coming in from other cities. And that is definitely a possibility, maybe even likely. I don't know. We're kind of going out of my depth of my understanding of real world economics and how all that works. And I don't know that I really want to get too deep into that because, again, unless it's relative or relevant to the player characters and what they're doing, it doesn't really matter. You can just hand wave stuff like that. But yeah, that is something to keep in mind if it ever comes up in the future that, there may be taxes on goods coming from other cities. And then those cities are taxing goods coming from Elandria. Could very well be. All right. G. Ferg, our Phantom co-host, also wrote in. Of course he did. He did. And G. Ferg says, okay, so maybe one of the things to help balance between the crown, the guild, and whoever else could be that has something vital to the survival of the city is, one, the guild controls the trade and most travel through the portals, which is, of course, really important. But maybe the crown controls the power source of not just the mythal, but in general. Like the one dude mentioned, ley lines and such. So maybe the crown controls that as it powers all the city's magical bits. So that's interesting. My initial kind of assumption, I guess, was that the guild also controlled the mythal and the magical wards around the city and whatnot. But, first of all, that might make the guild too powerful. Second of all, it might be just not terribly interesting if they just control everything magical. So this idea of, well, maybe the queen has control of the mythal and maybe that's kind of the root of her power. That's a really cool idea. Definitely something I'll have to think about. Also, G. Ferg says you could throw the church into that mix as well, or whomever else you want to have some sway, which could act like checks and balances. So yeah, yet another person pointing out that, in the system, the church would also be a powerful entity. And I totally agree. So we've got the crown, we've got the guild, we've got the merchants, the nobles, and the church. So we're starting out with kind of 5 factions or 5 social classes or 5 branches of the government, however you want to look at it. And eventually, we're saying that the nobles and the merchants will merge into one. So then we'll have 4. But right now we've got 5, and that's pretty interesting. And it's also an odd number, which is nice. No ties. G. Ferg says also maybe not all the cities survived. Maybe just the ones on the ley lines or their nexus, as maybe that's how the mythal and walls and portals and such are powered. So you could also have a bunch of ravaged, ruined, or taken over cities out there, as well as a bunch of survivors. And what would happen if some baddies had a city with portals? Just tossing out ideas. So yeah, that's great stuff. And totally, most of the cities did not survive. There's only a handful. I'm thinking at this point, 5 or 6 cities, at least as far as human cities, that survived the retreat. And the reason that they did survive were they were the ones that had these mythals. Now, G. Ferg is bringing in this idea of bringing in a larger system of like ley lines or something that the mythals themselves are using. That's interesting. That's definitely a possibility, definitely going to keep that door open. My initial thought of kind of how the mythals work are that they're based on an artifact that's kind of the power source. So each mythal would be entirely independent. But this idea of them being part of a network and getting power from some source, that's an interesting idea too. The other idea I had was that each mythal was created by a deity, in which case maybe we'd have 9 mythals, one for each deity. And I'm still toying around with that idea because I'm kind of marrying that with the idea of each city having a specific patron deity. So for instance, I'm thinking the patron of Elandria is the goddess of knowledge. And so maybe she created the mythal of Elandria instead of some ancient civilization. I don't know. It's an idea. G. Ferg says, I also like the idea of certain roads being protected, but say only the main ones, the Roman roads, if you will, the equivalent of, say, interstate highways and such. And yeah, that's definitely what I'm thinking is it's only the, like he's saying, like the highways, the main roads that are these magical roads that might have some kind of protection that could be activated. And I'm actually thinking of making these roads visually very unique compared to other roads and compared to one another. And I've got this idea of them being different colors, made from different kinds of stone. So I've already established a road leading out of Elandria that's looks to be made of red granite. So, that might be the red road or something like that. And there might be a green road and a blue road and a black road and things like that. And these are roads that were built millennia ago by some very powerful civilization that had crazy magic that no one has anymore. And, the idea is that maybe they used to have some kind of magical protection similar to a mythal, and it's just, it doesn't work anymore. And maybe the guild could discover that and figure out, or a party of adventurers could discover that and figure out how to make it work again. And then you could have a way to connect cities together by road and not just by portal. But as others have mentioned, that might not be something that the guild would want to pursue, or at least some factions in the guild would not want to pursue that. G. Ferg also makes a suggestion of having the mythal do things like preventing teleporting and preventing monsters from flying into and landing in the city, preventing, offensive magic from being used against the city and stuff like that, and having the physical walls be more protecting from physical attacks, like from trebuchets and fireballs and directed attacks and stuff like that. And that's actually kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the walls, the physical walls, are magically enhanced, and they're the ones that will block, a trebuchet from fleeing something into the city, or someone outside the city throwing a fireball into the city or something like that. And I'm thinking that the walls actually extend beyond their physical limits. So they're higher than what they look, if you know what I'm saying. And the mythal is just controlling the kinds of magic that can and can't be used and things like that. But yeah, that's definitely something I want to work out the details of. And again, stuff that doesn't really probably matter to the player characters, but it's something that once I get it figured out, I could make relevant to a particular story, and it could be something interesting. Thrice Great Hermes wrote in on the website and says, I've been thinking a bit about your city-state setup, and they can work even without an abundance of magic, though magic certainly will make everything easier. Necessity is the mother of invention. Pressed for space and with little ability to expand outwards, the people of the city are going to start building up and down. And yeah, that's a really good point. Your cities are going to be medievalish arcologies in a few generations. The people living there are also going to develop hydroponics and indoor vertical farming. As for meat, there could be small animal farms in the cities making meat a very expensive luxury food. If Elandria is near a large river, marsh, or sea, then there'll be plenty of seafood. Ice houses can provide long-term food storage. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, as far as the food production, I'm thinking that there are underground fields that are still within the mythal, and they're lit with permanent daylight spells, and they're actually growing mundane crops underground. And as far as the fields themselves, whether above ground or underground, I'm going to have them use a combination of terrace farming, especially the above ground, because Elandria is in a pretty hilly area. So they're going to have terraced fields. And then they're also going to use this technology that was used in certain places in South America, where they plant their fields on raised areas of soil. And then so your field is actually raised up on like a mound, pretty much. And then around the outsides of these mounds are basically irrigation ditches that carry water to all the fields. And it's a very efficient way to grow crops. And there's actually a term for that kind of farming, and I can't remember what it's called. So this allows for better utilization of land in places that aren't perfectly flat, like the terraces, and also allows for better irrigation. And again, this irrigation system is fed by the aqueduct system, which is fed by this portal into the plane of water. And also, Elandria is on the coast of the ocean. So in addition to all the crops that are being grown above and beyond, or below ground, if I could talk, there's also lots of fishing and seafood. And my thought right now is that the mythal actually extends out into the sea a bit. So fishermen can go out on their boats and fish, and they're still within the protective area of the mythal. And yeah, so there's seafood as well. Let's see, where were we? So Thrice Great Hermes goes on to say the republics of medieval Italy are the closest thing to rule by the merchant class that I know of, although the Italian republics were ruled by guilds. The easiest solution to your merchants and nobles setup would be to take a page from Cyberpunk and make the merchant class and the ruling class the same thing, literal corporate feudalism. The queen of Elandria is closer to being the owner and CEO of the oldest and richest house or firm to have survived the retreat than an actual medieval monarch. Taking the corporate feudalism idea, different houses are known for producing certain goods and services. Serfs are just low-level citizens / employees. So yeah, that's a cool idea too. And that would be a great way to go if I decided that having 5 different branches of the government or 5 kind of classes is too many, so I could combine the queen with the nobility and even combine that with the merchants. So I can combine those 3 into one, and that would be a really easy way to simplify things. So, knowing me and my love of simplicity, I say it's at least a decent chance that I'll end up doing something like that in the future. So we'll have to see. All right. So we have reached the end of the feedback that I wanted to go through today. Very happy that it looks like I'm going to be able to keep this episode around an hour. I know some of the recent episodes have been pushing an hour and a half. And yeah, we don't need them to be that long. But I'm kind of caught up on the feedback now. So actually, I think most, if not all of the feedback that I talked about today is feedback I've received since I did episode 112. So I'm finally caught up on kind of the backlog of stuff. So hopefully that will help to keep the episodes from getting too ungodly long. So that is going to wrap up episode 113 of Game Master's Journey. Thank you so much again to everyone who wrote in and provided feedback. I really appreciate it. And if I didn't get to your feedback on the show, I'm sorry. I apologize. Hopefully next time I will. I do a lot of times I'll get kind of similar things from different people. So I usually just kind of pick one to be representative, and I'm not going to read 3 different pieces of feedback that are saying a lot of the same things, but I try to give everybody a bit of the spotlight on these episodes, at least as much as I can. Now, if you're wanting to send in feedback for the next world building episode, or just more general gaming feedback for a non-world building episode, probably the best way to send me feedback, especially if you have much to say, is by email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Other great ways to send feedback are leaving a comment on the website or leaving a comment in our Google Plus community. And the Google Plus community for Game Master's Journey is awesome. We've got a lot of great people in there that are starting conversations and contributing to conversations about not only world building of Primordia, but world building of other people's campaign worlds. I know DM Nell has posted some maps and information about his world, and we've had other people, some of the people you've heard from today, talking about their worlds, and it's really great to see. Maybe you've got some questions. Maybe you're stuck on how to make something work in your world, or you just want some input or some ideas from people. And the Game Master's Journey community is a great place to do that and get some ideas and thoughts from different people. Also, I've had people posting their maps that they come up with for their home worlds, which is super cool. We've got some really talented people in the community that make awesome maps, whether they're making them digitally or they're drawing them by hand. Awesome stuff. So definitely check it out and check out the maps people have made and discussions. And again, if you want to talk about your world, feel free to do so. And I really enjoy reading about people's worlds. And the cool thing is sometimes you'll get an idea for your own world by reading someone else's. And even if it's like way, way different, you might see something someone else does and be like, that's really cool. I'm going to do that in my world, or something like it, or something inspired by it. So that's super cool. And I'm really happy. I made a post on the community recently, just thanking everyone for posting, because the community is I'm finally starting to see people use it the way I've always wanted people to use it, which is just a place to share ideas, to say, hey, look at this cool thing I came up with for my game, or to ask questions, whether it's, how to run a particular game or anything like that. I just love to see that. And I'm really glad that people are starting to use it. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid to post or whatnot. I'd love to hear from you if you have questions or something you want to share with the Game Master's Journey community. Now, I've had some requests from people, specifically on YouTube. I think I've had people request this the most. People have been asking for me to do a video on how to play D&D specifically, or how to play an RPG more generally. And I think what these people are looking for is they want a kind of how-to video on, if you're completely new to RPGs, you've never played one before, kind of what do you need to know to get started. And I think that it's mainly people wanting to play, although it might be people wanting to run a game. I don't know. So I am thinking about doing this, about making a video for, first time player and or first time GM. What do you need to know? It's going to be a challenging thing to do, not the least reason because it it's going to be hard for me to think of everything that a new player might want to know, or even a new GM might want to know. So especially if you're one of those people that have asked me to do a video on how to play D&D or some other RPG, please email me, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, and give me questions or let me know what you're confused about so that I can have an idea of what people need help with and what you want explained in a video about how to play D&D or how to play an RPG in general. Same thing if you're wanting something about how to GM something. I'm getting the impression that people are wanting something for someone starting at ground zero, at square one, like you've never played or anything before. What do I do? And I'd be happy to do that, but you can help me out by sending me specific questions or just letting me know, what's confusing to you or what kind of things do you want me to explain? And, right now I'm thinking I'm definitely going to do one for players, but if people are interested in one for GMs, let me know that too. And also let me know if you're wanting something more general for any RPG or if you're wanting guidance on a specific game, like for instance, Dungeons and Dragons. So let me know. And that's something I can start working on in the future. I think it'll be fun to do. So I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Stanko, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.